Welcome back everyone to Creepy Secrets. Tonight we're venturing deep into the wilderness for 10 of the most disturbing true Appalachian camping horror stories. These mountains are beautiful by day, but when the sun goes down, they turn into something else entirely. From campers who heard footsteps circling their tents to those who woke up to find something watching from the tree line, these stories will make you think twice before spending a night alone in the woods. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Creepy Secrets, hit that like button, and share this video with your friends. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's get started. I didn't realize I had made a mistake until the sun was already setting behind the ridges of the Appalachian Mountains. I thought I knew what isolation felt like, but nothing in my city life could have prepared me for the emptiness of those woods. I parked my old Jeep at the trailhead, the gravel crunching under the tires, and unloaded my pack, trying to ignore the cold wind that whispered through the pines. I told myself I was just getting paranoid, that the forest always sounds stranger when you're alone. Still, I had this gnawing feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here, like the woods themselves were holding their breath and watching me. I picked a clearing for my campsite near a small creek. The ground was soft with pine needles, damp from a recent rain, and the smell of wet earth mixed with decaying leaves made me hesitate for a second. But I brushed it off and started pitching my tent. Everything went smoothly at first, the familiar ritual of threading poles and securing stakes comforting in its simplicity. As darkness approached, the temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath in the dimming light. Shadows stretched long and sharp across the forest floor, and the rustle of unseen creatures made my heart rate spike. I told myself it was squirrels, maybe a raccoon, anything but the notion that someone, or something, was nearby. I built a small fire, the flames struggling against the wind, and cooked my dinner. The smell of burning wood filled the clearing, mingling with the earthy aroma of the creek. I kept glancing over my shoulder at the tree line, every snap of a twig making me flinch. Around dusk, I thought I saw movement, just at the edge of the firelight, a figure standing among the trees. I froze, staring, but when my eyes adjusted, nothing was there. I tried to rationalize it as a trick of my eyes, maybe my mind creating shapes from the shadows. I laughed nervously, shaking my head, but the feeling didn't leave. The forest had eyes. I could feel them tracking me. Night fell fully, leaving me alone with the crackle of the fire and the distant calls of owls. I zipped myself into my tent, leaving only a small ventilation flap open. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I could hear water trickling from the creek. I told myself to sleep, that tomorrow I'd hike back to the trailhead, back to safety. I rolled over and closed my eyes. That's when I noticed it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, like someone breathing. I sat up sharply, heart hammering, ears straining in the darkness. The fire outside had burned low, casting weak shadows through the mesh of the tent, but I could hear it again, clearer this time. A slow, deliberate inhale and exhale right beside me. I froze, scanning the interior of the tent with my flashlight. Nothing. Just me, my sleeping bag, and the crumpled backpack at my feet. My pulse raced. There was no one. There couldn't be. And yet, the breathing continued, steady and unnervingly close. I whispered my own name, telling myself it was probably an animal outside, something that had slipped past the tent. But the sound wasn't outside, it was inside. I gripped my flashlight, my knuckles white, and shined it across the tent floor. The beam caught nothing but fabric and shadows. I told myself to calm down, to breathe. But then I felt it, warm air brushing against my arm, slow and steady, as if someone had their face just inches from me. I recoiled, my entire body stiff, but the space next to me was empty. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible, that no one had gotten into the tent. I was alone. Alone in the middle of the Appalachians, and yet someone, or something, was right there. I scrambled out of the tent, flashlight swinging wildly, and scanned the clearing. Nothing. The fire had burned down to embers. The wind was still, almost too still, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. I stumbled toward the Jeep, desperate to get inside, but as I ran, I thought I saw a movement in the shadows, a dark silhouette crouched low, watching me. I stopped dead, my flashlight shaking in my hand. It didn't move like a person. It was too fluid, too wrong. My heart thumped in my ears as I convinced myself it was a deer or some nocturnal animal, but something about its presence screamed intentionality, awareness. It was waiting. I spent the rest of the night in the Jeep, shivering under a blanket, my flashlight illuminating the trees in erratic sweeps. Every sound, the creak of branches, the rustle of leaves, the distant crash of a falling limb made me flinch. I tried to keep my eyes open, tried to convince myself that morning would bring safety, but sleep eventually claimed me. And when I slept, I dreamt vividly. In my dreams, the forest closed in around me, twisting and stretching unnaturally. Shadows moved independently of the trees, and I felt the breath again, warm on my neck, whispering words I couldn't understand. I woke in a cold sweat, convinced it wasn't just a dream. Morning light was a relief, though it brought no real comfort. I packed up my gear quickly, my hands trembling, and started hiking down the trail toward the road. The woods seemed calmer in daylight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was trailing me, just out of sight. Every time I turned my head, a shadow darted between the trees. I didn't stop, didn't slow down. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I had to get out. Hours later, I reached the road, flagged down a passing car, and left the mountains behind. I told myself I was safe now, back in civilization, surrounded by people. But safety was an illusion. That night, at my apartment, the memory of the breathing lingered. I kept the lights on, checked the locks multiple times, but it didn't matter. I could feel the presence again, faint at first, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. The metallic, earthy smell from the creek filled the corners of the room. Shadows stretched across the walls, moving slightly as if breathing along with me. I tried to tell myself it was post-traumatic stress, that I was letting fear warp my senses, but every instinct screamed otherwise. I wasn't alone, not truly. Over the next few days, the signs multiplied. Footsteps at night, soft but deliberate, echoing across my hardwood floors. Objects slightly moved from where I had left them. A faint rustle behind doors or curtains when no one could be there. I even saw fleeting shapes from the corner of my eye, dark and fluid, moving against the walls. I never saw a face, never saw anything tangible, but the feeling of being watched was constant, unrelenting. I stopped going outside except for necessities, never letting my guard down. Sleep became a scarce commodity, each night filled with whispers and the sensation of breath on my skin. I realized that whatever had followed me from the Appalachians didn't need a body to torment me. It existed in proximity, in perception, and it was patient. Weeks later, I tried to confront it. I went through old camping gear, tried cleansing rituals I had read online, sprinkled salt, burned sage, anything to break the hold. Nothing worked. That night, I woke to the unmistakable sensation. Warm air on my cheek, slow, measured breathing, impossibly close. My eyes snapped open to darkness. The shadows in the corners seemed to lean closer, coalescing slightly as if aware of my gaze. I bolted upright, heart hammering, but there was nothing tangible to strike, nothing to run from. The presence, the breathing, the whispers, they were all that remained. I could feel them pressing against my mind, and I realized with a sinking certainty that I had brought something home with me. Something that couldn't be left behind in the mountains. I moved again, hoping distance would help, relocating to another city, another apartment, hoping the change of scenery would break the connection. It didn't. Every new place carried the same telltale signs. The smell of wet earth and rust, the subtle shifts of shadows, the whispers curling around my consciousness. Friends and family dismissed my concerns, attributing it to anxiety, insomnia, or imagination. I stopped talking about it. I stopped trusting anyone. I couldn't. The presence was patient, intangible, and it didn't need to reveal itself fully to control the fear it elicited. Now, months later, I've learned to live with the constant unease. Lights stay on, doors stay locked, and I avoid anything that reminds me of those mountains. Even typing this, I feel it. The brush of air at the back of my neck, the faint whisper, a warm exhale I cannot escape. The Appalachian forest followed me, and whatever it is, it waits. It doesn't need to act. It doesn't need to show. It exists in the margins of perception, in the half glances, in the edge of hearing. I can never truly relax. I can never truly sleep. Every time the wind moves outside, I catch the faintest scent of damp earth and rust. And I remember that night in the woods when I woke to someone, or something, breathing on me. And I know, deep down, that it's still there. Always patient, always waiting. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound that didn't belong. The wind had dropped, and the usual rustle of leaves was gone. Only the faint crack of a branch breaking somewhere deep in the woods, slow and deliberate, punctuated the silence. My campsite felt exposed, even though I had set it up near a small ridge, thinking the elevation would give me some security. The fire I'd built earlier was almost out, leaving only faint embers glowing red in the cold night. I pulled my jacket tighter, the chill biting through the fabric, and listened. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my gut. I first noticed it earlier, just before dark. I'd set up my tent and started gathering firewood, hearing little noises that didn't make sense. A crunch here, a snap there. But whenever I turned to look, nothing moved. The trees themselves seemed wrong, not alive exactly, but tense, like they were bracing for something. A feeling crawled over my skin, the kind that starts at the nape of your neck and spreads to your fingertips. My camping experience in the Appalachians had been limited, but I knew the difference between wind and being watched. And I was being watched. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon, but the way the shadows shifted, the way the leaves seemed to twitch when I wasn't looking, didn't feel natural. I lit my fire and cooked some food, keeping my back to the trees and scanning every flicker of shadow. The air smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and something metallic. I couldn't place it, and that unsettled me even more. Every so often I thought I caught movement, a silhouette between the trees, just out of the corner of my eye. Each time I turned my head, nothing was there. Night fell completely and the temperature dropped fast. I wrapped myself in a sleeping bag near the fire, hoping the glow would keep me calm. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving just beyond the light. Every now and then, a twig snapped sharply, close enough to make me flinch. I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it's just the animals settling in for the night, maybe a fox or raccoon. But the steps didn't sound like animals. Too heavy, too careful, like someone or something was stalking the edge of my campsite, watching, waiting. Hours passed. I forced myself to lie still, holding my breath whenever a noise came too close. Every shadow seemed to elongate and twist in impossible ways. At one point I thought I saw a figure standing perfectly still, hidden among the thick trunks. The more I stared, the less distinct it became, melting into the darkness like smoke. My rational mind screamed at me to stay calm, but the primal part of me, the part that knows instinctively when something is hunting you, kept urging me to run. I didn't move though. I couldn't. The fire was almost gone, and I realized I couldn't even see clearly what was around me anymore. Then the smell hit me again. Iron, sharp, unmistakable. Blood. I choked back a rising panic, glancing around frantically. There was nothing, only the whisper of the trees in the cold night air. And yet I knew the smell was close, almost tangible. I tried to listen, straining my ears for anything, every snapped twig or rustle in the underbrush sending a jolt through my chest. Every hair on my body stood on end. I couldn't see, but I could feel eyes pressing into me, cold and deliberate. I tried to stay awake, shaking myself, whispering out loud to keep my mind alert. I imagined all kinds of rational explanations. An animal, my imagination, but none of them fit. The pacing of the movements was wrong. Too patient, too intelligent. Every time I thought I could catch a glimpse of whatever it was, it vanished into the darkness, leaving only the heavy silence and the faint metallic smell. My nerves were fraying. I started muttering nonsense, trying to convince myself that I was alone, that no one was there. But the hair on my arms told me otherwise. Hours became a blur. I kept hearing things, rustling, shifting, soft footfalls. They were never consistent, never obvious, always just at the edge of perception. The fire finally went out, leaving me in almost total darkness. I could see the faint outlines of the trees, but no detail. Every shadow seemed to move on its own, stretching toward me, bending in ways that didn't make sense. My stomach churned as I realized that whatever was watching wasn't interested in scaring me off. It was waiting, calculating, studying. At some point, I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if the noises were real. A soft, deliberate step, a branch snapping under weight, then a pause, then another step, closer this time. I clutched my small camping knife, breathing shallowly, trying to pinpoint the direction. The movements weren't random. They were circling, surrounding me slowly, precisely. I wanted to call out, to scream, but my voice felt trapped, useless. The darkness seemed to press against my chest, making it hard to inhale. Suddenly, a twig snapped right beside me. I jumped, swinging the knife blindly. There was nothing. The trees were still silent. I couldn't tell if the thing had retreated or if it was hiding, watching, waiting for me to relax. I realized then that I hadn't blinked in what felt like hours, eyes darting, straining for any sign of movement. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat echoing like a warning drum. My body was shaking, but I forced myself to sit up straighter, to keep alert, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. Time stretched. My mind wandered to the stories I'd heard about the Appalachian wilderness, people disappearing, hikers vanishing without a trace. I had laughed at those tales before, chalked them up to local superstition and paranoia. Now I understood the fear. There's a predatory intelligence in these woods, subtle and unseen, patient and cruel. The thought made my stomach twist. I realized I had to leave at first light, but the longer I waited, the more I felt that whatever had been watching would follow. Then I heard a whisper. Low, distant, almost drowned out by the wind. I froze, straining to hear. It came again, clearer this time, a hiss of a voice that was neither male nor female, human nor animal. Just one word, leave. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to respond, to tell it to go away, but no sound came out. The air grew colder, pressing against my lungs, and I realized I had been holding my breath without knowing. When I finally exhaled, the sound carried farther than I expected. The whisper returned, this time layered, multiple voices repeating, echoing, leave. Leave, leave. I didn't wait any longer. I bolted upright, grabbing my backpack and running blindly toward where I remembered the trail. My feet sank into the soft, damp earth, branches whipping my face, mud coating my legs. Every rustle, every movement in the underbrush made me flinch, but I ran, driven by sheer terror. The darkness seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees leaning toward me, twisting in ways that defied logic. The whispers continued, fading only slightly as I put distance between myself and the campsite. Finally, I broke through the thickest of the fog and saw the faint glimmer of dawn on the horizon. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but relief surged as I realized I was near the main trail. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked haphazardly at the trailhead. The forest behind me was silent again, almost normal, but I knew it had only been waiting. I didn't look back. I started the engine and drove, fog swirling around the tires, the air still cold, still heavy with the scent of metal and pine. I never returned to that campsite. I don't camp in the Appalachians anymore, and I avoid the backwoods whenever possible. But sometimes at night I can still feel it, a presence hovering at the edge of my vision, patient, watching, waiting. Shadows that move when I'm not looking, sounds that vanish the instant I try to find them. And I know without a doubt that if I ever step into those woods again, I'll feel it immediately. Eyes in the darkness, stalking, calculating, never letting go. Something was watching me from the trees all night, and I'm not sure it ever stopped. I knew I shouldn't have stayed out that late. The fire was low, smoldering, and the woods around me had started to feel different, like they were holding their breath. I was camping alone, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, something I'd done a few times before, but that night felt off. The air was heavier than usual, thick with damp leaves and the faint smell of smoke lingering from my dying fire. Every snapping twig and rustle of underbrush made me jump. I kept telling myself it was just deer, raccoons, the usual wildlife, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. The woods were watching. I had been sitting there for hours trying to coax the fire back to life. My matches were wet from the mist rolling down the mountain, and my hands were trembling from the cold and frustration. The light from the embers flickered against the surrounding trees, stretching shadows that seemed to shift and grow when I wasn't looking directly at them. I could hear the soft hiss of the fire, the occasional pop of a log, and nothing else. Or so I thought. Then I heard it, a quiet snapping, deliberate, just beyond the firelight. I froze, my hands clutching the damp matches, and listened. Another snap, closer this time, followed by a faint shuffle. My heart jumped, and I told myself again it was an animal. Except animals don't move with patience. They don't stalk. The wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves, and I thought I heard whispers. Not words, just soft, indistinct murmurs that made my skin crawl. I tried to laugh, shaking my head. I'm usually not the kind of person to be spooked, but that night my usual bravado left me. I focused on the fire, coaxing a few sparks, but the momentary light only revealed more shadows, stretching far beyond the small circle of warmth. And in those shadows, I could have sworn I saw movement. Quick flickers, like something ducking between trees. I tried to stand, thinking maybe I could scare whatever it was off by showing I wasn't afraid. But as I rose, the fire sputtered and went out entirely. Darkness swallowed me, absolute black, the kind that makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum in a cavern. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking so badly the beam wavered across the forest floor. That's when I realized something impossible. The shadows were moving differently than the trees. They weren't just shifting with the wind. They were coming toward me. I froze, holding my breath. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt rooted. A low rustling started, circling me now, coming from multiple directions. Branches cracked under weight I couldn't identify. I could feel the eyes on me, hundreds of tiny pinpricks of awareness, tracking my every move. I whispered to myself that it was just the woods, just my imagination, but the air felt alive, like it was pressing in, the forest itself leaning closer, listening. Then I heard it clearly. A soft, deliberate snapping, close this time, just to my left. I swung the flashlight, catching a figure, or maybe just a shadow that seemed human but wrong. Its limbs were elongated, moving in jerky, unnatural motions, and it disappeared when I blinked. I stumbled back, almost tripping over a root, and the rustling followed, faster now, surrounding me. I ran blindly, hoping to reach the path I'd hiked in on. But the trees felt endless, and every step seemed to take me deeper into the woods instead of out. The whispers returned, this time with rhythm, like voices calling in turns, circling me, rising and falling with the wind. "Why are you here? Don't leave." "Stay," I shouted, demanding they stop, my voice cracking. But the voices only laughed softly, layered and inhuman. The forest wasn't just alive, it was aware. It was hungry for attention, and it knew I was alone. My flashlight flickered again, catching glimpses of shapes crouched just beyond the edge of the beam. Humanoid but impossibly thin, twisted, eyes glinting, watching. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe hallucinations from being wet and cold. Maybe fear amplifying normal forest noises. But rational thought couldn't explain the dragging sound I heard next. Deliberate, slow, as if someone, or something, was moving through the underbrush behind me. And with it came a faint odor, sharp and metallic like iron. My stomach twisted. I ran faster, my lungs burning, but the forest didn't end. The path had vanished, replaced with trees that didn't belong where they had been, twisting and leaning, closing in. I tripped over something soft, landing hard against the wet ground. My flashlight rolled, catching on a figure standing over me. Not a shadow this time. Flesh? I couldn't tell. But it moved wrong, limbs bending in ways that shouldn't bend, head cocked, eyes reflecting my light. I scrambled backward, hitting a tree, and the thing didn't advance, just watched. From somewhere behind me, dozens more whispers layered together, murmuring my name, teasing, urging. Panic consumed me. I ran again, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping my face, mud soaking my clothes. The rustling followed, relentless, circling, impossible to escape. I felt fingers brush my shoulder, or thought I did. I couldn't be sure. Every tree looked like it had a face, every shadow like a crouching figure. The forest had become a living trap, a predator stalking me through twisted geometry. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had no meaning. I ran until I found a break, a clearing I remembered from my initial hike in. My legs were raw, body shaking uncontrollably. I paused, flashlight held high, listening. The whispers had stopped. The rustling faded. Silence, heavy and complete, pressed down. I dared to take a breath, telling myself I was safe, that I had escaped. Then I noticed the footprints. Dozens of them circling the clearing, fresh in the damp soil. Too large, too deep to be mine. They led in a spiral, ending nowhere, as if whatever had followed me was marking the territory, waiting for me to leave. I ran, stumbling down the trail, trying to reach the road where I'd parked. The air felt thin, cold, and I could hear faint snapping behind me, like something following, pacing, never closing in but never letting go. I reached my car just as dawn broke. The forest behind me looked normal again, just trees and underbrush, no shapes, no figures, nothing. The air smelled like ordinary morning dampness, and for a moment, I almost laughed at myself. Almost. But then I noticed the tracks around my campsite. They weren't just in the clearing. They were all around my car, circling, ending abruptly at the forest's edge. And in the center of the spiral, etched in mud with long, deliberate strokes, was a single word: stay. I drove home in silence, heart hammering, hands gripping the wheel. I wanted to tell myself it was a prank, someone messing with me, but the area was remote. Nobody had been there. I'd seen the shapes, heard the whispers, felt the pressure of the forest closing in. I didn't sleep that day or the next. Every shadow in my room, every whisper of wind reminded me of those woods. I could still feel it, alive, waiting. Weeks later, I returned to the same spot during the day, rational, equipped, determined to prove it was all in my head. The forest looked normal in daylight, harmless even. But when I reached the clearing, I saw something impossible. The ground, undisturbed by rain, had a spiral of footprints carved into the dirt, leading inward, ending in the center. Nothing else, just the pattern. No human footprints, no animal tracks, nothing natural. My stomach turned. I left immediately, glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see movement, but saw nothing. I've avoided camping since then. I don't go into those woods alone. I tell friends it's because of bears or rough terrain, but that isn't the reason. I can still feel it sometimes, the pressure of unseen eyes, the soft snapping in the distance, the whisper of my name when the wind shifts. I know the forest remembers me, and I know it's waiting for me to come back, waiting for someone else to stay late and feel it alive. And I know if I ever return, the fire won't just go out by accident. It will be taken, and the woods, patient and deliberate, will move closer, and I won't run fast enough. I shouldn't have gone that far into the woods. I knew it as soon as the path narrowed and the trees grew thicker. Their branches tangled above like fingers blocking out the late afternoon sun. My friends had already gone back to the main campsite hours ago, tired and joking about how I was obsessed with exploring. I shrugged it off, telling myself I just wanted to see where the trail ended. But the second I stepped off the familiar path, I felt it. The shift in the air. The forest became quieter. The usual birdsong faded. Even the wind through the leaves sounded different, like it was being swallowed by something bigger. My stomach turned and I slowed my pace, flashlight in hand. Though the sun was still out, the trail wound deeper, twisting in ways it shouldn't. Roots erupted from the ground, forcing me to step carefully, and the smell changed too. Pine and dirt gave way to damp, decaying leaves, and underneath, a faint stench of something rotten. My heart beat faster, and I felt that uneasy crawling on the back of my neck. Then I saw it, footprints. Fresh, human, leading off the path toward the shadowed thicket. They were too large to be my friends, too deliberate to be deer. My curiosity outweighed my fear, and I followed. The deeper I went, the darker it got, even though the sun was still high. The trees seemed closer together, their bark rough against my fingertips as I brushed past. I kept hearing noises, snaps of twigs, soft shuffles, but every time I turned, nothing was there. My breathing grew heavier, the sound of it almost deafening in the silence. I wanted to turn back, but some stubborn part of me refused. I told myself I would just see where the trail ended, just a little further. Then I saw the cabin. I swear I stopped breathing. At first I thought it was a trick of the trees, a shadow forming into walls and a roof. But no, it was real. A small weathered log cabin, dark wood blackened by age, smoke curling faintly from a crooked chimney. The weird part? It shouldn't exist. I had studied this area before, knew the maps, knew the terrain. There were no cabins this deep in the national forest. Nothing. And yet, here it was, like it had grown out of the ground itself. I approached cautiously, every step loud in the unnatural quiet. The air smelled of smoke and something metallic like iron. The door was slightly ajar, creaking with the slightest breeze, and I thought I saw movement inside. Not a person, not quite, but a shadow shifting too quickly to be natural. My chest tightened. I had to know. I pushed the door fully open, and it groaned like the whole cabin resented my presence. Inside, the cabin was small, cramped, and darker than the woods outside. The smell hit me stronger, damp wood, rot, and something sickly sweet underneath, like old blood mixed with sugar. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed by my flashlight beam, and the floorboards sagged in places. I thought I saw furniture, tables, chairs, but they looked strange, off-kilter, like they had been cobbled together from pieces that didn't belong. Then I noticed the walls, Photographs, hundreds of them, yellowed and curled, pinned in a chaotic pattern. Faces of people, all staring, all expressionless. Some looked familiar, others didn't. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen anyone in this part of the woods for miles. Who were these people? A sudden noise made me jump. Something scraped across the floor behind me. My flashlight flickered. I spun, but the corner of the room was empty. I told myself it was the wind or maybe a loose floorboard. But the air was still. I could feel it, a presence, something breathing in the corner, watching me. I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut with a force that made the walls shake. My heart raced. I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, and I realized I hadn't even thought to check for a lock when I entered. I was trapped. The cabin grew colder, the temperature dropping so fast my breath fogged in front of me. A scratching sound started at the far wall, slow at first, then faster, like nails dragging across wood. I raised my flashlight, scanning frantically, and saw something move. Something thin, hunched, emerging from the shadows. Its face was hidden under a hood, but I could feel its eyes on me. The photographs on the wall rattled as if vibrating with some energy I couldn't understand. The figure stepped closer, deliberate, silent except for that scratching, sliding sound. I backed away, knocking over a chair. It didn't stop. The figure just tilted its head, the faintest whisper escaping from it, almost human, almost a warning. My pulse hammered so loud I thought it would burst through my chest. I tried the door again, nothing. I was trapped with it. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness so complete it felt alive. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me, coming from every direction at once. I stumbled over furniture, my hands finding splintered wood and cold metal. Then I saw them, shadows moving in the corners, stretching, twisting, faces pressed against the walls. Hundreds of faces, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide, staring. My skin crawled. I screamed, but the cabin swallowed the sound. The figure came closer, and I realized it wasn't alone. Shapes slithered across the floorboards, emerging from the walls themselves. They weren't fully human, not fully anything I could name. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like puppets with broken strings. I ran blindly, tripping over a fallen table, scraping my hands and knees, feeling the cold, rough wood bite into my skin. The whispers became voices, chanting in a language I didn't know but understood in my bones. I scrambled to the back wall and found a small window, just big enough to squeeze through. The glass cut my palms, but I didn't care. I tumbled into the underbrush outside, the cold dirt hitting my face. The wood silent again, as if nothing had existed inside the cabin at all. I didn't stop running until I reached the trail, the familiar path back to my campsite. My flashlight was shattered, my hands bleeding, but I didn't care. I told myself it was over, that I had just imagined the cabin, the shadows, the faces. I laughed nervously, the sound hollow in the dark woods, and tried to calm my shaking body. But the further I went, the heavier the feeling of being watched grew. Every rustle of leaves, every broken branch sounded like footsteps behind me. When I reached the campsite, my friends were already gone. I called out, my voice cracking, but there was no reply. The tents were empty, the fire cold. Panic overtook me. I started walking back toward the car, keeping my head on a swivel, expecting to see the hooded figure or one of those twisted shapes emerge from the darkness at any moment. I didn't. I got to the car, locked myself inside, and sat for hours, shivering, watching the woods. Even after I left that night, driving down the winding mountain road, I couldn't escape the feeling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cabin, the photographs, the faces pressed against the walls. I could hear the whispers, faint but unmistakable, calling my name. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, stress, or exhaustion, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. A week later, I went back during the day, rational, cautious, expecting maybe to find nothing, and finally put this behind me. The woods looked normal, the trail familiar, but the cabin was gone. Every fallen branch, every footprint I had remembered vanished. It was like it had never existed. I searched for hours, yelling, scanning, even marking trees to trace my path. Nothing, no traces, no signs of life, no smoke. Just forest. I wanted to tell someone. I considered reporting it, but who would believe me? A trick of the light, overactive imagination, stress from camping, friends would say. And yet I can still remember the smell of rotten smoke. the metallic tang in the air, the soft whispering voice that seemed to crawl into my skull. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up and think I see that hooded figure at the edge of the trees near my apartment window. I hear the whispers faintly, calling my name, laughing softly, and I know somehow it hasn't left. The cabin might be gone, but whatever lived there is still out there, waiting, watching. I don't go camping anymore. I don't trust trails, and I definitely don't wander alone in the woods, but I can't shake it. Every shadow at the tree line makes my chest tighten. Every unexplained rustle of leaves makes me flinch, because I know the cabin is out there somewhere, and the next time I stumble across it, I won't just see shadows. I'll see them waiting. I remember the first time it happened, like it just happened last night. I had set up my tent deep in the Appalachian backwoods, miles from any trailhead, miles from anyone who could hear me scream. I'd been hiking all day, the kind of hike that leaves your legs trembling and your lungs screaming for air. By the time I found a small clearing near a creek, the sun was dipping behind the trees, and the forest was turning into a black maze. I picked a spot, checked the ground for rocks, laid out my tent, and crawled in with my sleeping bag. I was exhausted and happy, maybe too happy because I didn't notice the silence around me, the way the air felt thick like it was holding its breath. I must have fallen asleep almost immediately. I remember drifting in that half-conscious state when I felt it, a sharp, jarring shake. The tent shifted violently under me, snapping me upright. My heart slammed against my ribs. I was sure someone had grabbed it, maybe a prankster or another camper. I scrambled up, half asleep, and peeked outside. Nothing. Just dark, endless forest, and the creek glinting faintly under the moon. I cursed myself for being jumpy, blamed the wind. But the wind had been still all evening. I double-checked my stakes. They were secure. No rocks, no sticks. Nothing could explain that shake. I tried to settle back into my sleeping bag, but my heart wouldn't let me. Every creak of the tent, every rustle of leaves outside made me flinch. By midnight, I had convinced myself it was probably an animal. Bears and raccoons are common in these woods. But still, the shake had been strong, deliberate, like someone had grabbed the tent and wrenched it. I shook my head and tried to sleep. Hours later, I woke to the same thing, tent shaking again, gently this time, almost like a warning. My stomach dropped. I sat up, flashlight in hand, scanning the black around my tent. Nothing. No footprints, no movement. No sound except the soft whisper of the creek. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the flashlight straight. I started whispering to myself, trying to rationalize it. The trees creaked. That was normal, I told myself. Animals brushed past. Normal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. The next day, I packed my day pack and went to explore, trying to take my mind off it. I hiked along a ridge, the trees stretching like silent sentinels, and told myself I was imagining things. But then I saw tracks near my campsite when I returned, a line of footprints uneven, too long for me, too light for a bear. They stopped at my tent and didn't continue. I stared at them, my stomach twisting. Whoever or whatever had done this had come close enough to touch me while I slept, but hadn't gone farther. I stayed up all night after that, flashlight in one hand, a heavy branch in the other, eyes scanning the dark. Hours passed. Nothing touched the tent again, but I could feel it. Something was out there, waiting. On the third night, it escalated. I was barely asleep when it started, tent shaking violently, hard enough to tear the fabric. My bag toppled, sleeping pad sliding under me. My flashlight skidded across the ground, and I scrambled to grab it. The shaking stopped immediately when I shone the light outside. Nothing, not even a shadow. The air felt thick and electric. My breath came in shallow gasps. I stayed awake after that, watching, listening. Every little sound, the snap of a twig, the whisper of leaves, made my body jerk. I tried to leave the campsite, convinced the shakes were some warning. As I packed my gear, I noticed something strange. Small, shallow depressions in the dirt around my tent, like someone had been pressing lightly, testing the ground. The shape was humanoid but wrong. Elongated, uneven, almost crouched, and they disappeared into the forest. I couldn't follow them. My heart wouldn't let me. I got back in my tent that night, sleeping lightly, one eye open. By the fourth night, I couldn't ignore it. The shakes started earlier, always when I was half asleep, sometimes while I was lying on my side, sometimes while I was trying to read a book to distract myself. I kept my flashlight on a timer, but it barely helped. I could hear scratching on the tent poles, soft, deliberate, like nails dragging across metal. The air smelled of damp earth and something coppery, almost like blood, though I knew there was none. My stomach churned. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was trapped by exhaustion and disbelief. I tried calling someone on my phone, just for comfort. Signal was spotty, weak at best. When I did manage to send a message, it wouldn't go through. The tent shook again hard, cutting my words off mid-sentence. I froze. The shakes weren't random. They followed a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. The adrenaline made my hands numb. I felt frozen, eyes locked on the shadows between the trees. I wanted to run, but the forest around me felt endless, swallowing, like I'd never make it back to the car. Eventually, I tried reasoning with it. Silly, I know. I whispered into the darkness. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to fight. The shaking slowed, almost gentle, like it was listening. My heart pounded in my ears. The forest stayed silent after that, but I didn't sleep. Not really. Every time I drifted, a faint pressure on the tent reminded me that it was still there, watching, waiting, patient. The fifth night, I couldn't stay inside. I sat outside my tent, knees pulled up, flashlight scanning every inch. Fog rolled in low, thick, sticking to the ground. The forest seemed alive in the beam of my light, shadows stretching, bending. That's when I saw it, or something like it. Just beyond the ring of light, a crouched shape, thin, taller than a person, hunched over. It didn't move, but the air around it vibrated, cold, sharp, smelling of iron again. My stomach turned. I dared not blink, and when I did, it was gone. The fog had swallowed it whole. Sleep became impossible. I tried listening to music, podcasts, anything to drown out the forest, but the shakes returned anyway. Sometimes it was gentle, almost playful, like a warning. Sometimes hard enough to make me slam my face into the sleeping bag. The air smelled strange sometimes, like burning leaves or wet dirt mixed with something metallic. I could hear faint whispers at times, almost indistinct, like someone muttering my name, or the name of the mountain itself. The forest had become a presence, a living thing, watching and learning. On the last night I stayed, I couldn't even bring myself inside the tent. I sat in the open, flashlight on, rain beginning to fall in cold, heavy sheets. The tent shook violently, enough that my hands flew up to brace it. The thing, whatever it was, didn't need to be near me to shake it. The air itself seemed alive, charged, thrumming with intent. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it beyond the shaking, but I could feel it, like it was breathing into me, testing me. I realized then I wasn't camping in the forest. I was in its territory, and I was the intruder. I packed up at first light, soaked and shaking. Every branch, every fallen leaf seemed to glare at me as I ran to the car. I didn't stop until I was on the main road, the forest behind me silent, pretending nothing had happened. But the feeling didn't leave. Even now I swear I can feel it sometimes, brushing against my shoulder when I sleep, tugging at my tent poles if I ever return. I'll never camp in those mountains again. I'll never forget the sound, the smell, the pressure of it, the shakes that came without anyone being there. I know it's still out there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to sleep in its forest. I should have turned back the moment I saw the creek. It was a small, murky trickle winding behind my campsite, barely wide enough to call a proper stream, but the sound of it was hypnotic. I'd set up my tent a few dozen feet away, thinking the gentle babble of water would be relaxing at night. But as the sun dipped below the ridges of the Appalachians, the forest seemed to grow sharper, colder. Shadows deepened between the trees, and that creek, once just a background hum, started sounding like something else. At first I thought I imagined it, but then I heard it clearly. My name, whispered in the rush of water. Huzaifa, just a soft hissing murmur that carried across the rocks. I froze, telling myself I was tired, that the isolation had me hearing things. I hadn't spoken aloud since I arrived. No one knew I was here. I shouldn't have heard that. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself the creek was just echoing the wind or the rustle of leaves, but it called again, sharper this time, dragging the syllables slowly over the rocks, almost deliberate. Huzaifa. My stomach dropped. My flashlight was in my hand, casting a thin cone of light over the campsite, and I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Everything looked normal. Trees, rocks, the faint outline of my tent, but the creek kept whispering. I couldn't see anyone, yet the sound was close, intimate, as if something crouched just behind the bank. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to cooperate. I felt my heartbeat echoing in my ears louder than the creek itself. I tried to leave, stepping toward the path that led back to the main trail, but every step made the whisper grow louder. My name again, drawn out, almost mocking. I realized with a sickening clarity that the sound wasn't just coming from the water. It was coming from somewhere behind it, somewhere I couldn't see. I knelt down, thinking maybe it was some prank, some other camper with a voice modulator, but the forest was silent apart from the creek. No footsteps, no human sounds, only the faint chirp of crickets and the whisper that had my name on its tongue. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the creek. The surface of the water rippled unnaturally, though there was no wind. Shadows pooled along the banks, stretching and twitching, forming shapes that my rational mind tried to reject. I told myself I was just imagining things, maybe shadows of trees, maybe my reflection. But then a hand, pale and thin, emerged from the water. Not fully, just the fingers curling over a rock, glinting wetly in my flashlight. I stumbled back with a grunt, hitting a tree with my shoulder. My light swung wildly and the hand disappeared instantly. But the whispering didn't. It became clearer now, as if something wanted me to understand it, wanted me to pay attention. My name, repeated in a low, urgent tone. I whispered back, trying to sound brave. "Who's there?" The creek only gurgled, running over rocks, but I swear I heard a laugh under the water, wet and brittle, like leaves snapping in a storm. My campsite, once comforting, now felt like a trap. I couldn't see beyond the pool of my flashlight, couldn't judge distance, couldn't tell if I was hearing it in front of me or behind. I was certain, though, that whatever it was could move faster than I could imagine. I ran toward my tent, ripping the zipper open and grabbing my backpack. I tried to ignore the way the forest seemed to close in on me, the way every branch seemed bent toward me. I glanced back once, stupidly, against every instinct, and saw something crouched in the creek. It wasn't human, or at least not completely. Its head was too large, too narrow at the chin, eyes shining wetly like the surface of the water. Limbs bent wrong, elbows sticking out like broken twigs. It tilted its head and whispered my name again, and I swear the sound came from inside my skull. I didn't stop running until I hit the main trail. The night was cold and full of sounds, owls, the distant howl of a coyote, but none of them carried my name. I didn't want to look back, but something inside me forced me to glance once, and the creek was calm, moonlight glinting on its surface as though nothing had happened. I wanted to convince myself I had imagined it. That exhaustion and isolation had gotten the better of me. But deep down, I knew that thing in the creek had followed me somehow, leaving the water still while its presence lingered. I tried to sleep that night in my car, parked on the edge of the trail, but every sound from the forest made me jump. A branch snapping, the rustle of leaves, even the distant drip of water. Each noise carried the echo of that whisper. I kept thinking I heard my name softly over the engine's hum. And every time I blinked, I could have sworn I saw pale fingers dragging themselves along the windshield. I didn't sleep. I drove the next morning, every hour spent glancing in the mirrors, expecting it to appear, expecting to see those two large eyes staring back. It followed me in smaller ways after that. Sometimes I'd hear my name in empty rooms, whispered from corners I knew held nothing. Sometimes I'd see reflections in windows or darkened mirrors, fingers or faces shifting just beyond recognition. I tried to tell people. My friends laughed, saying the woods had gotten to me, that I'd been spooked by a creek at night. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. I know the way that sound, that voice, could reach across the mountains, across the hours, and touch me when I least expected it. I haven't camped alone since. I haven't returned to that creek, but I can't shake the sense that it's still there. Watching, waiting, whispering. Some nights I dream of it, and I wake with my name still echoing in my ears, low and deliberate, curling around my skull like smoke. I'm careful now, careful where I hike, careful where I listen. But I can't escape the feeling that one day the creek will call again, and I will be too far from safety to run. And when that day comes, I'll hear it, clear and patient, whispering from the shadows, Huzaifa. Even writing this now, I feel it. The memory isn't gone. It never will be. The mountains hold it, and the creek remembers. The whisper waits for me somewhere out there, patient, low, and unbroken. And I know it will speak my name again. I thought I knew what solitude felt like until that weekend in the Appalachians. I had gone out with a small group of friends for a simple camping trip, hiking, fishing, the kind of weekend meant to feel peaceful, the city far behind us. I ended up leaving the group for a few hours to explore a trail that snaked along a ridge above a creek. By the time I set up my own small campsite, the sun had dropped low, slanting through the trees, making everything look longer, darker, and sharper. That's when I first noticed them, footprints pressed into the soft soil around my tent. They weren't mine, and they weren't my friends. They were small, narrow, almost like someone had walked barefoot in the damp earth. The prints curved around my tent in a near-perfect circle, coming within a foot of the stakes, and then vanished toward the undergrowth. My stomach twisted. The forest was quiet, eerily so, except for the usual creaks and rustles of leaves and branches. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, but the shape didn't make sense. It was too long, too human, but somehow wrong. I left my tent for a moment, flashlight in hand, and followed the prints. The trail wound through thick ferns and pine needles, leading toward the edge of a small clearing. My ears were ringing with tension. Every snapping twig made me flinch. When I got to the clearing, the prints just stopped. The earth was undisturbed past that point, but I could swear the ground had a faint downward slope, almost like it had been worn into a depression. I felt watched. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, but there was nothing, no movement, no eyes. Just shadows shifting as the wind sighed through the branches. I went back to my tent and tried to ignore it, but the unease settled into my chest. I double-checked my gear, made sure my small knife was at hand, and lit a fire. The orange glow threw the shadows across the campsite in long, twitching shapes. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was the isolation playing tricks. The air smelled damp, piney, and cold, with a faint tang I couldn't place, metallic, almost like rust or old blood. I tried to shake it off. Night fell fully, and the forest became a living thing. Sounds I hadn't noticed before filled the silence. Distant cracking of branches, faint rustling in the underbrush, the soft murmur of the creek below. I couldn't see the trail anymore. The footprints were gone, vanished as if they had never existed. I tried to sleep, but every time I drifted off, I imagined someone crouching just beyond the circle of firelight, watching, waiting. My dreams were fractured, faces in the dark, whispers I couldn't catch, hands reaching toward me. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, and the tent felt smaller, the forest closer, tighter, almost breathing. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a soft crunching of leaves near the edge of my firelight. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I froze. The sound came closer, careful, deliberate. Then I saw them. Bare feet, pale, narrow, moving slowly toward the camp. I gripped my knife, my throat tight, but I couldn't move. The feet stopped just at the edge of the light, and I saw a shape, thin, hunched, and impossibly still. Not a man, not an animal, just something crouched, watching me. I didn't dare make a sound. I thought about screaming, but my voice was gone. I watched it, impossible to blink, every instinct screaming that I should run, but my body refused. Then it shifted slightly, just a hair, and vanished into the shadows. I ran then. I left everything behind, my fire smoldering, my tent half collapsed. I ran down the ridge toward the main trail, the forest around me thick and unyielding, the branches slapping at my face and arms. I didn't stop until I found the lights of my friend's campsite. They thought I was joking when I told them what I saw. "You probably just imagined it," one of them said. I nodded, not wanting to sound insane. I spent the night in their tent, jumping at every rustle. When dawn came, I returned to my site to gather my things. The footprints were back, or maybe they had never left. They circled the spot where my tent had been, pressed deep into the mud, ending abruptly in the middle of the clearing. There was no trail leading away, no depression, nothing beyond where I could see. It was as if whoever, or whatever, had walked in a circle just to let me know it had been there. I left as fast as I could, my stomach knotting, my hands shaking, and I didn't look back until I was back on the main road. The forest seemed normal then, harmless even, but I knew it wasn't. I've gone camping since, tried other trails, but the thought of that night lingers. Every time I close my eyes, I see the footprints circling, small, narrow, human but wrong. I can feel the weight of being watched, even when I'm in my apartment, hundreds of miles away. Sometimes I wonder if it was a person, Some local playing a prank, a hiker who slipped by my tent at night. But the prints weren't like human feet. They were too narrow, the toes too long, the pace impossible to match. The creature I imagined crouching in the shadows that night. Well, imagining it is easier than saying it out loud. It wasn't human. It was an animal. It was something patient, something that had waited until I was alone to make its presence known. I've read about creatures in the woods. Folklore and myths the locals sometimes mention, shadow people, trickster spirits, predators that watch for lone hikers. I never believed them, but I know now that the forest can be patient. It can wait, and when it decides to watch, it doesn't blink. It doesn't leave footprints that lead anywhere except into your mind. That weekend changed me. I can't camp alone anymore. I check my surroundings constantly, even in my own backyard. The first time I saw those footprints, I thought it was curiosity, a thrill, an adventure. Now I know better. I don't know what was circling my camp that night. I don't know if it was waiting for me to leave, or waiting for me to see it, or waiting for something else entirely. I just know that the footprints were there, real and impossible to follow. And that's the worst part. You can't chase something that disappears into nothing. You can't fight something that leaves no trail. You can only wait, terrified, and hope it doesn't decide to circle again. I haven't gone back to the Appalachians since. I haven't told anyone the whole story. Not friends, not family, not even my therapist. I keep it buried, but it comes up in dreams, in the creaking of floorboards, in the shadows along the walls. Sometimes I see faint impressions on the carpet in my apartment, too narrow to be human, just enough to make my stomach churn and my hands sweat. I keep thinking I'll forget it, that it was a hallucination, that my mind added fear to shadows and shadows to footprints, but I know I won't. That night in the forest, the air smelling of pine and damp earth, I saw something that left no trail except into my memory. And sometimes when it's quiet, I swear I hear the crunching of leaves again, soft, careful, deliberate, like it's still circling, still watching, still waiting. The footprints don't go anywhere. They lead to nothing, and yet I know somehow they are always coming back. I didn't know what I was expecting when I decided to camp alone in the Appalachians, but I sure as hell didn't expect that night. I arrived just before dusk, dragging my gear down a narrow trail that looked like it hadn't seen human feet in weeks. The air was sharp, heavy with pine and wet earth, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and makes you feel alive and uneasy all at once. I found a small clearing by a creek, perfect for a fire, and set up my tent quickly, eager to get settled before darkness fell completely. There was a weight in the air that I couldn't shake, a low, almost imperceptible hum in the wind, like the forest itself was watching. I told myself it was nerves, first solo trip, first real wilderness night, but I didn't feel right the second I stepped out of my car. By the time I had my fire going, the sun had disappeared behind the ridges, leaving everything in gray shadows and fog that slithered along the ground. The first crackle of the fire felt comforting, the orange light pushing back the creeping darkness. I cooked a small meal, instant noodles and canned beans, but I barely tasted them. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me flinch. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just the wind, deer, or raccoons, but deep down I knew something felt wrong. It wasn't long before the feeling intensified. I lay back on a blanket, staring at the stars peeking through the canopy, when I noticed movement just beyond the firelight. Shadows stretched and flickered like they had a life of their own, sliding along the trunks and undergrowth. I froze, straining to see, telling myself it was a trick of the flames, but the movements were deliberate. Not animal-like, human-like. I grabbed my flashlight, trying to sweep it across the dark shapes, and that's when I felt it. A gaze. Somewhere out there, just past the fire's glow, someone or something was watching. I called out, my voice breaking the heavy silence. "Hello?" Nothing. The air was thick and still again. I tried to calm myself, told myself it was just the forest messing with my mind. I had brought a knife and a lighter, little comforts I clung to for reassurance, but the feeling didn't leave. Every sound, the rush of the creek, the whistle of the wind, the snap of distant branches, felt amplified, like the forest was alive. And I was intruding. Night settled fully, and I crawled into my sleeping bag near the fire, telling myself I would stay alert, that I would be fine. I could hear small things moving outside the circle of light, scratches, rustles, soft thumps. but I told myself they were deer or squirrels. But then I heard it, the breathing. Soft at first, tentative, like someone trying not to be heard, coming from just beyond the firelight. I froze, heart hammering. My hand went to the knife, my other hand clutching the flashlight. The breaths grew louder, slower, deliberate, close enough that I could almost feel the warmth against my skin. I whispered to myself that it was impossible, that no one else could have been here, that this was my wilderness, my safe space. But every instinct screamed otherwise. The shadows beyond the fire didn't move naturally. They waited, crouched, watching. And then, faint at first, a low sound joined the breathing. A whisper, almost beneath the noise of the fire. I couldn't make out the words, but it was deliberate, taunting, and the hairs on my arms rose. I wanted to run, but the firelight made me a target. Whatever was out there, it knew I could see, and I couldn't risk moving. My mind raced through every horror story I'd ever heard. The hiker who vanished, the camper who never returned, the stranger who appeared at night. And I realized in a gut-wrenching way that I wasn't alone. Not by accident. Minutes felt like hours. I couldn't see anyone, but I could sense movement. Faint swishes through underbrush, branches bending, the snap of small twigs under deliberate weight. Then the fire flared as a gust of wind hit, and I caught a glimpse, a figure just at the edge of the glow. Not human, but humanoid. Its limbs were thin and wrong, crouched low, and it moved with a terrifying, unnatural stillness. I blinked and it was gone, but I could feel it still, like the forest had exhaled onto me, a cold, wet breeze that smelled faintly metallic. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone. But the screen read, no service. The isolation I thought I craved was now suffocating. Every shadow potentially hiding eyes, hands, claws. I tried to keep calm, telling myself I could wait it out, that this was just fear. That morning would bring safety. But the whispers continued, faint and layered now, circling, echoing through the trees. I wanted to crawl into my car, but the thought of moving through that darkness paralyzed me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I can't tell. The forest became a predator. I could hear footsteps now, light but deliberate, circling my fire, stopping, listening, moving again. My fire flickered, and in the dim light I saw them. Figures crouched low in the trees, more than one, pale, distorted, humanoid but wrong, waiting just out of reach. I felt a cold panic rising in my chest, sweat clinging to my back despite the chill. Then the closest one stepped forward, just past the edge of the fire's glow. Its eyes reflected the firelight, black and empty, unblinking. It crouched, tilting its head, studying me as if I were a curiosity, a meal, or maybe just a toy. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs refused, glued to the earth by a terror I couldn't explain. Its movements were deliberate, smooth, unnaturally silent as it slid closer and closer to the fire. I don't know how I survived what happened next. I can't explain it logically. Something, some instinct, some divine luck, made me reach for the firewood stacked nearby. I grabbed a log and swung it toward the creature. It hissed, recoiled slightly, and that moment was enough. I bolted toward my tent, tripping over roots, scraping my hands and knees. I could hear them chasing me, whispering now, closer, faster. I jumped into the car, slamming the doors, locking them, my hands shaking so violently I could barely start the engine. I drove blindly, headlights cutting through the fog and darkness, adrenaline keeping me on the narrow mountain roads. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, gas station lights glaring, warm air, human presence. And even then, when I tried to explain what happened, no one believed me. "You must have seen an animal," someone said, "or maybe hallucinated from fatigue." But I knew better. I could still feel them, cold, waiting, lurking just beyond the edge of any light. Days later, I returned to the site, determined to prove to myself that I hadn't lost my mind. The clearing was empty, normal, the fire pit cold and abandoned, nothing to suggest what I had experienced. No tracks, no shadows, nothing, but the feeling stayed with me. Every gust of wind through the trees, every snap of a twig makes my stomach turn. I never camped alone in the Appalachians again. I never wanted to. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about them. Just shadows in the trees, crouched and silent, eyes glinting in faint light, whispering my name, waiting. And sometimes, when I drive past the mountains, I catch movement at the edge of the tree line, and I can feel their gaze following me. Not human, not quite animal, Just waiting, watching. I can't explain what I saw. I can't tell you why it was there, why it knew I was alone, why it didn't just leave me. I only know that it existed and that it still waits there, somewhere in the Appalachian darkness, just beyond the glow of any campfire, just beyond the reach of any human eye. And if you ever decide to camp alone, remember this: it's not the darkness you should fear. It's what lurks at the edge of the light, waiting for you to be careless, waiting for you to blink. And when it finds you, it will remind you that the forest has eyes, and that sometimes something is always watching. Even now, writing this, I can feel it, watching, waiting, just beyond the glow. I remember the moment I realized I wasn't alone. I had set up my tent in a small clearing deep in the Appalachians, miles away from any marked trail. The sun had already dropped behind the mountains, and a cold wind was rolling through the trees. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I unpacked my gear, tried to shake off the feeling that something was watching me. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling animals, just the creak of the wind through the pines and the soft crackle of my small campfire. That's when I heard it, a laugh. A low, distant laugh that bounced between the trees. At first I thought I imagined it. The woods play tricks on your mind, they say. But then it came again, closer this time, sharp and hollow, like someone was deliberately watching me from behind a tree. I froze, my heartbeat kicked into overdrive. I had no idea what it was, but it wasn't normal. I tried to call out, but my voice sounded too small, swallowed by the dark forest around me. I grabbed my flashlight, scanning the tree line, but the beams caught only shadows and the swaying of branches. There was nothing there. I told myself to stay calm. People camp alone all the time. It was probably a hiker or a hunter. Still, the laugh was wrong. It had a rhythm, a tone, like it was enjoying my fear. My stomach turned, a cold knot tightening inside me. I tried to focus on starting a fire, trying to keep the edges of the forest illuminated, but the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, growing with every flicker of my torch. The laughter came again, closer now, almost behind me. I spun around, but there was no one. Just the dark trees and the rustling leaves. I knew I should pack up and leave, but it was already too dark to hike safely. I tried to stay in my tent, pulling the flap tight, but I could still hear it, laughing, soft, then sharp, echoing through the trees like it was circling me. My breath formed small clouds in the cold night air. The laugh wasn't natural. No human should be able to disappear into the woods that fast. Something about it felt inhuman but familiar, like it knew me, like it had been waiting for me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I can't tell. The laughter didn't stop. It didn't matter if I turned off my flashlight or tried to stay completely still. It would ring out from somewhere I couldn't see. Every time I thought I was imagining it, it would echo again, almost inside my head, and I would jump, heart hammering, unable to move. I started whispering to myself, trying to convince myself it was the wind or my nerves, but it didn't help. The sound was real, and it was hunting me. I tried calling 911 on my phone, but there was no signal. Even if there had been, I'm not sure anyone could have reached me in time. The forest was too dense, too remote. I felt trapped, and the laughter seemed to mock me for even thinking I could escape. I thought of leaving my flashlight on and running, but every time I tried to stand, I felt pressure on my chest, like the trees themselves were leaning in, making it impossible to breathe easily. My instincts screamed at me to run, to hide, to do something, but I was frozen, pinned by fear I couldn't name. Then I heard something else. Twigs snapping, soft at first, then sharper, faster. Not just one set of steps, but many. And the laughter changed. It sounded closer, right at the edge of my firelight. I could feel eyes on me. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. Every nerve in my body screamed to move, to get out, but I was stuck, unable to pull my feet from the cold earth. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking, waiting for something that felt inevitable. The laughter slowed and became softer, like it was playing a game, testing me. I could hear whispers, low and murmur-like, weaving in and out of the trees, and sometimes I could swear I heard my name being called. That's when I noticed the shadows. Not just the normal shadows of trees, but shapes, tall, thin, stretching too far across the ground, moving independently of the moonlight. They weren't human, not exactly, but they were intelligent. They shifted, observing me, circling me without ever letting me see where they were. I crawled toward my tent, trying to make myself as small as possible, but the moment I touched the zipper, I felt a hand, or something like a hand, brush across my shoulder, ice cold, wet. I yelped, spun around, and saw nothing. The darkness was impenetrable, thick as velvet. I could hear the forest breathing, and the laughter started again, low, almost satisfied, echoing between the trees. My flashlight flickered, dimming, and I could feel the shadows leaning closer. I don't know how I survived the night. I stayed in my tent, huddled, whispering to myself, refusing to close my eyes. The laughter came and went, sometimes far away, sometimes inches from my ear. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves felt like a threat. I tried to sleep, but sleep was impossible. The forest didn't allow it. Something in those woods didn't want me alive. Not dead either exactly, just terrified, aware, and alone. Morning came, though I don't remember seeing the sunrise. It was more like the light crept in slowly, reluctantly, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I left my tent, my body sore, eyes raw, but the shadows seemed to retreat with the light. The forest looked ordinary again, trees, dirt paths, bird song, but I knew better. The laughter hadn't gone anywhere. It was patient, hiding, waiting for darkness to return. I packed quickly, barely able to move my trembling hands, and started back down the trail. Every snap of a branch underfoot made my heart jump. Every rustle of leaves sounded like someone or something following. When I reached the edge of the woods where the trees thinned and the first signs of the road appeared, I thought I was safe. The sun was high, the air warm, and the shadows seemed to have no life. I started driving, trying to convince myself it was over, that I had imagined it all. But that night, at home, when the lights were off and I was finally alone again, I heard it. A soft, distant laugh, like someone had stepped into my living room and then vanished. I tell myself it's not real. I tell myself I'm safe, but the sound lingers in my mind. I can hear it echoing when I close my eyes, coming from the dark corners of my room, stretching out into the shadows of my life. I've never been back to those woods, and I never will, but I know it's waiting. It knows my name now, and I know that one day it will call again. I knew something was off the moment I parked at the trailhead. My map app said the trail would be empty, just me and the forest for miles. Perfect, I thought. A solo weekend in the Appalachian wilderness, away from the constant noise of city life. But the instant I stepped out of my car, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. The wind rustled the amber leaves in a way that sounded almost like whispers, and the forest felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath, watching me. I shook it off, zipped up my jacket, and slung my pack over my shoulder, telling myself it was just nerves. The first few miles were normal, almost too serene. Sunlight filtered through the trees, painting the trail in patches of gold and shadow. Birds called from the treetops. Squirrels darted across the path. I tried to settle into the rhythm of hiking, but I kept feeling eyes on me. I would stop, scan the surrounding woods, and see nothing. Just the trees, the moss, the rocks. Still, the sensation didn't leave. Every snap of a twig behind me made my stomach tighten. By midday, I reached a small clearing with a creek cutting across the trail. I knelt to refill my water bottle, enjoying the sound of the water trickling over rocks. That's when I first noticed it, the faint rustle of movement from the tree line. Subtle, almost like someone brushing past leaves, careful not to make a sound. I froze, holding my breath. I expected to see another hiker, but there was no one, just the forest. My pulse picked up. "Get a grip," I muttered, standing and adjusting my pack. Maybe a deer, maybe the wind. It had to be. I pushed on, taking the trail deeper into the woods. The trees grew taller and closer together, the light dimming under the thick canopy. My map said this section was empty, no other hikers, no campgrounds. Perfect for solitude, yes, but perfect also for being alone with whatever I wasn't seeing. That evening, as I set up my tent in a small clearing near a rocky outcrop, the feeling grew heavier. The forest seemed to press in, the shadows stretching unnaturally long in the fading sunlight. I lit a small campfire, hoping the warm glow would shake off the unease. But every time the flames flickered, I could swear I saw movement beyond the ring of light. Night fell quickly, colder than I expected, and I crawled into my sleeping bag. The crackling fire had mostly died down, leaving me with the soft whisper of the wind and the occasional call of a distant animal. Then I heard it. A footstep, soft, deliberate, not on the dry leaves around my tent, but closer, as if it circled me. My heart jumped. I froze, straining my ears. Nothing. Maybe a branch. Maybe an animal. Still, the unease didn't leave. Every sound in the dark seemed amplified. The hiss of the wind, the rustle of leaves, the soft groan of the trees swaying. Around midnight, the sense of being watched became unbearable. I stepped out of the tent, flashlight in hand, sweeping the forest in wide arcs. Nothing. Only the trees, the rocks, the faint glow of stars. I laughed nervously, shaking my head, telling myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. The air had changed. Heavier somehow, pressing down in a way that made it hard to breathe. The next morning, I set out earlier than planned, hoping daylight would ease the tension. The forest was still eerily quiet. Birds were almost silent, squirrels nowhere in sight. I followed the trail, marking every twist and turn, keeping my eyes peeled for anything unusual. That's when I realized the footsteps weren't gone. Behind me, faint impressions in the dirt, light, careful, too deliberate to be mine. I stopped cold, scanning the woods. Nothing. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I started walking faster, heart hammering, glancing over my shoulder at every step. By midday, I reached a fork in the trail where the map said I should have turned left. But instinct told me to go right. Something about the air shifted. The smell, the way the light bent through the trees, the rustle of leaves that felt like whispers. I turned right. The path narrowed, winding through dense undergrowth. The canopy so thick the sun barely touched the forest floor. That's when I started hearing it. Soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably footsteps following me. Slow, measured, always behind, always keeping pace. I dared not look directly, fearing whatever was there would vanish into the shadows. Or worse, notice me looking. Hours passed like this. My energy drained faster than it should have, my legs trembling with every step. Every time I paused to catch my breath or sip water, the forest went silent, only for the sound to resume the second I moved. It was clever, patient, a presence that didn't make itself obvious until I noticed it. The trail, which had seemed straightforward, now twisted unpredictably. Stones and roots I had marked earlier appeared in new arrangements, as if the forest itself had shifted. By late afternoon, I stumbled into another clearing, one I didn't recognize. The sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, shadows pooling around every rock and fallen tree. And that's when I saw it, motion slow and deliberate at the edge of the clearing. Just a shape, dark, hunched, humanoid but not quite human. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. My rational mind screamed that it was an illusion, the play of shadow and light. But instinct screamed louder. It was real, and it was watching me. I ran. I didn't care about direction, about landmarks. I ran blindly through the trail, stumbling over roots, slipping in mud, lungs burning, heart slamming against my ribs. Every time I thought I had put distance between myself and the shadow, I would catch glimpses of it again, just beyond a tree, slipping behind a boulder, keeping pace without effort. Its movements were too smooth, deliberate, almost inhuman. Dusk fell as I pushed further, and the trail opened onto a small creek that should have marked the end of the section I was on. I collapsed by the water, trembling, gulping cold water and trying to steady my ragged breathing. That's when I realized the footsteps hadn't stopped. They were here, closer now, circling me in the clearing. I couldn't see clearly, but I could feel it. The presence of something waiting, patient, intelligent. Not hunting in the traditional sense, it didn't need to chase me yet, but aware. Observing, testing me. I spent the rest of the night near the creek, refusing to sleep, moving only when I had to. My flashlight sweeping constantly. Every rustle, every snap of a branch made my stomach churn. I couldn't see anything definitive in the shadows, but I knew it was there. I could feel it, an oppressive weight, a cold awareness that wasn't natural. Morning brought no relief. The forest felt unchanged, but my nerves were shredded. I tried to navigate back using the map, but the trail seemed different. Trees blocked paths I had walked before, rocks appeared where they hadn't been, and the undergrowth seemed thicker, almost sentient, curling toward me as I moved. I could hear faint whispers again, almost human, just at the edge of comprehension. My skin crawled. By midday, I stumbled onto what looked like a familiar clearing, one marked by a large rock formation. Relief washed over me, finally a landmark. But as I approached, I froze. Footprints, too large and irregular to be mine, led right up to the rock. And behind it, nothing visible, but I could feel it, watching, waiting. I realized then that I hadn't been alone for any part of this hike. Whatever it was, it had paced me, learned me, known my pattern. I didn't stop. I ran, pushed through brambles and mud, chased by the awareness of it without a single sound to mark its movement. I reached the trailhead as the sun dropped behind the ridges, exhaustion nearly overtaking me. I jumped in my car, locking the doors, shaking so badly I could barely grip the keys. I told myself it was over, that once I left the forest, I was safe. I wasn't. Even back in town, in my apartment, I could feel it. The faintest sense of eyes tracking me, shadows shifting in peripheral vision. At night, I hear soft rustles, small, deliberate movements in the dark. I've stopped venturing far from home. My map app is off. I don't go to the woods anymore. But the sense remains, patient, aware, waiting. I think about that trail constantly. The way the forest seemed alive, aware of me. The way the shadows moved unnaturally. The way the footsteps always matched mine, never wrong, never too fast. I don't know what followed me, or why, but I know it did. And I know deep down that one day it might catch up. The map said the trail was empty. It was wrong. I wasn't alone, and I haven't been alone since.